There's nothing accidental about optics. Chris Van Hollen's voice cut through the quiet of the war room, each word landing like a sharp blade. They're curated, just like justice, just like outrage. The DNC headquarters conference room was the epitome of contradictions. Colonial architecture, a nod to the old guard, met with sleek modern strategy. Dark walnut walls, oil paintings of past icons like Kennedy and Clinton, juxtaposed against a table of glass, cold and transparent. A symbol, if not an irony, of the power that lay beneath. On the far wall, a grainy, almost haunting image was projected. A man with close-cropped hair, hands zip-tied behind his back, a faint smear of dried blood beneath one eye. The caption was brief but loaded. Kilmar Abrego Garcia, deported under Trump's America First policy. Van Hollen paced the room slowly, his hands clasped behind his back, exuding the quiet confidence of a professor lecturing a room full of believers. His staff sat rigid, afraid to blink out of sync with his words. "He's not the story," Van Hollen continued, nodding toward the image. "He's the stand-in, the symbol. America didn't deport a man, it deported a narrative. And now, we're flying down there to retrieve it." The air was thick with anticipation. One aide, sharp-jawed media advisor Fallon, leaned forward, the gravity of the situation setting in. "There's blowback risk. Fox will call him MS-13 before we even land." Van Hollen didn't flinch. He didn't even blink. "And we'll call it character assassination of the voiceless." Fallon scribbled it down. No hesitation, no questions. Just a cold, calculated note. "That phrase," Van Hollen continued, eyes narrowing with intensity, "goes in every press release, every caption, every interview. Say it until it becomes truth." At the edge of the table, a younger staffer, Lena, fresh from Georgetown, hesitated, her hands trembling slightly as she spoke. "But, sir, there's the matter of, well, his file. The wife-beating allegation." Van Hollen paused, then slowly turned to face her. "What about it?" Lena nodded nervously, avoiding his gaze. A silence stretched between them, not menacing, but surgical. He could see her discomfort, feel her unease, but he wasn't fazed. This was a game of perception, not morality. "This isn't a criminal trial," he said calmly. "It's a human story. And in human stories, nuance gets edited out for impact. Remember that." Lena nodded again, cheeks flushed, eyes firmly fixed on the table. He tapped the manila folder in front of him. "This is the version we present to the world. No tattoos, no prior. Just a man stripped of hope by American cruelty." Fallon, ever the strategist, leaned forward again. "And the setting?" Van Hollen thought for a moment, looking out the window. Capitol Hill shimmered behind a thin veil of clouds, stoic, unreadable. The view from the DNC headquarters was always a reminder of the weight of the office, the eyes of the nation always watching. He stood with his hands in his pockets, the wind fluttering a corner of the flagpole above, as if calling to him for action. "Somewhere tropical," he said, the words almost like a whisper. "Green with shadows. Makes El Salvador feel dangerous. Makes us look brave." He turned back to face the room, the intensity of his vision clear in his eyes. "Do you know what the American people respond to?" He didn't wait for an answer. Pain. Or at least the illusion of it. The room was silent, waiting. "We give them pain with a redemption arc," Van Hollen continued, his voice hardening. "With conviction. Garcia becomes the mirror. And when we fly him back, when we show him standing beside me, we rewrite the last 4 years in a single image." He paused, letting the weight of his words settle over the room like a thick fog. Everyone understood. This was the moment that could change the narrative. This would be the image that redefined the story of the past administration. Fallon, never one to be swept away by emotion, nodded approvingly. But Lena, still green in the political game, seemed unsettled. "But, sir," she ventured, her voice trembling slightly, "what about the optics of, well, the backlash?" "This man," Van Hollen cut her off, his voice a calm but firm rebuke. "The optics are everything. Don't you see? We aren't selling a man's story. We're selling an image, and images are curated. They don't just appear. We make them, and we make them ours." Lena went silent, her discomfort palpable. Van Hollen was right. This was more than just a political maneuver. It was an opportunity to craft a narrative that could carry them through the election cycle, maybe even beyond. The plan was in motion, meticulously crafted, every detail accounted for. From the setting to the messaging, everything had been designed to fit the narrative they were constructing. "We need to control this," Van Hollen said, his gaze scanning the room, making sure everyone understood their roles. "It's all about optics." Across the room, Fallon pulled out his phone and began to type rapidly, no doubt preparing the messaging that would flood the media once they arrived in El Salvador. The team knew exactly how to spin this. They had done it before. They knew the formula. Van Hollen's eyes narrowed as he took one last look at the photo of Kilmar Abrego Garcia. He wasn't just seeing a man. He was seeing leverage. Leverage that could be used to reshape the American political landscape. "Monday," he said, his voice sharp and commanding, "wheels up at dawn. And make sure the margarita shots come. After the press leaves, not before." Laughter bubbled up, controlled, calculated. The plan was set. The stage was ready. Van Hollen knew exactly what he was doing. This was more than politics. This was war. Thousands of miles away, Naibul was already watching, waiting for the inevitable fallout. As the White House closed its curtains for the evening, light still spilled through the arched windows of Casa Presidencial in San Salvador. Naib sat behind an L-shaped desk, a few files scattered in front of him. His eyes were fixed not on the television screen where CNN looped the story about Van Hollen's humanitarian efforts, but on a grainy surveillance photo of Kilmar Abrego Garcia, time-stamped 3 nights ago. The photo showed Garcia unshackled, drinking soda, laughing with another detainee. Booley, ever calm, didn't flinch. The American narrative was creative, but in his eyes, it was also highly flawed. He picked up the Washington Post, tapping it with a knuckle. "Third world death camp," he muttered, almost amused. "They think I'm the backdrop," Boole said to no one in particular, his smile faint but calculating. "They want to play hero on my soil with a villain they've painted into a victim." He opened Garcia's file, flipping through reports, some from the U.S., others from his own domestic intelligence. His fingers paused on a memo from a Salvadoran judge, dating back 3 months. The links to MS-13, the protective order from Garcia's partner, the multiple arrest reports, all the pieces of the puzzle that the U.S. had ignored in favor of. "A redemption story." "Let them bring a film crew," Booley said, turning to his press aide. "I'll give them a set." He didn't need to say more. He knew exactly how to play this game. The Democrats had set the board, and now he was about to make his move. The stage was set. America deported a man into hell. We flew to bring him back to dignity. That was the narrative they would sell. It would appear on every outlet. Fallon, ever. The sharp strategist looked impressed. Lena, the younger staffer, was visibly pale. The rest of the team was focused, like generals preparing for a campaign, 2 weeks away from polling day. "When do we leave?" someone asked, their voice laced with urgency. Van Hollen looked at his watch, then at the grainy photo of Kilmar again. He didn't see a man. He saw leverage, a tool to rewrite the narrative, to spin the narrative that could carry them through the storm. He made the call. "Monday, wheels up at dawn, and make sure the margarita shots come after the press leaves, not before." The room erupted in controlled, calculated laughter. The plan was set in motion, and across the globe, thousands of miles away, Naib Bhul was already watching. By the time the White House closed its curtains for the evening, light still spilled through the arched windows of Casa Presidencial in San Salvador. A low, blood-orange sun sliced through the foliage like a warm blade, casting an eerie glow. Naib Bhul sat behind an L-shaped desk, a mess of dossiers strewn before him. His back was straight, eyes fixed not on the television screen where CNN was looping a story about Van Hollen's humanitarian crusade, but on a grainy surveillance photo clipped to the topmost file. Kilmar Abrego Garcia, time-stamped 3 nights ago. Garcia, unshackled, drinking Coke, laughing with another detainee. The image was anything but what the American media would portray. The American narrative, Bhul thought, was creative, at best. Third world death camp? Bhul murmured, almost amused, tapping a knuckle against the printed headline in the Washington Post that lay nearby. The room around him was austere. White marble, colonial detail, cooled by ceiling fans rather than central air. It felt more like a courtroom before a verdict. Bhul remained unmoved. He had already made his decision. From across the room, Defense Minister Rene Marino peeked in, uncertain. "They say the senator's coming with press," he offered cautiously, "and a drone crew for the documentary." Bhul didn't even look up. "Let them bring a film crew," he said calmly. "I'll give them a set." He opened Garcia's file and began flipping through the pages, not just the glossy U.S. briefings filled with redacted lines and dated ICE rulings, but his own domestic intelligence reports. These included images from inside the detention complex, medical logs, social media surveillance, and one telling memo from a Salvadoran judge dated 3 months prior. The allegations: MS-13 ties. A protective order filed by his partner. Multiple police reports documenting violent offenses. None of this was a secret. Yet America had decided Garcia was a test case for compassion. They had picked him to be their symbol, the face of their human rights agenda. "They think I'm the backdrop," Bhul muttered, more to himself than to anyone else. "They want to play hero on my soil with a villain they've painted into a victim." A long pause followed before, almost imperceptibly, he smiled. "So, let's give them exactly what they came for." He turned to his press aide, who stood silently with a notebook in hand. "Arrange the meeting. Van Hollen gets his audience with Garcia. Let the cameras roll, but send them to that beach resort just outside La Libertad. Nice palms, plenty of shade and cocktails." The aide blinked, confusion registering. "You mean, let them film with drinks?" Bhul nodded without hesitation. "Of course. You want a redemption story, make it glossy. Make it Instagrammable." Outside, the wind stirred the palms, the evening light fading into amber. Bhul leaned back in his chair, hands folding across his chest, as if settling into his own thoughts. "He thinks he's flying into a war zone," Bhul said, almost as if speaking to the setting sun. "But he's flying into a theater." The aide scribbled the orders down quickly, the gravity of the situation sinking in. The defense minister gave a quiet nod and slipped out. The press team dispersed, moving with the quiet precision of a war council, while Bhul remained still and sharp as a knife, tucked behind glass. He didn't raise his voice. He didn't need to. The battle had already been won. The Democrats had set the board. Now Bhul was ready to move the Queen. The resort when they arrived was almost too perfect. Waves folded onto the sand like iron silk. The palms swayed with an elegance that seemed rehearsed. The pool reflected the sky like a liquid mirror, and somewhere in the distance, a parrot squawked as if on cue. Chris Van Hollen stepped out of the black SUV with his sleeves rolled up, collar slightly loosened, sunglasses perched just right, not too serious, but just enough to imply authority. Behind him, the press followed, silent but charged, like a spring coiled tight. "We're not here for optics," Van Hollen reminded the cameras, even as a boom mic hovered above his shoulder. "We're here to document truth, not manufacture, spectacle." Across the terrace, Kilmar Abrego Garcia sat under a white canopy, a glass of lime-infused soda resting untouched on the table before him. His white button-up shirt was crisp, cuffs rolled to the forearm. No sign of restraint, no visible bruises, no guards. Just a man and a table set for two. Van Hollen approached, his gaze steady as Garcia stood slowly. Their handshake was deliberate, unhurried. No aggression, no theatrical gestures, just two men at the center of a staged production. "I've seen cameras before, Senator," Garcia said with a dry chuckle, eyes meeting Van Hollen's with a steely edge. "But usually they're security ones. I'm not given a script." Van Hollen responded smoothly, his tone calm, almost rehearsed. "You're not here to perform. You're here to speak your truth. That's all I'm asking." Garcia looked at him with a half-smile, his eyes holding a cynical wisdom. "Speak my truth?" He chuckled again, but this time it wasn't a joke. "The last time I spoke mine, I ended up in a detention van, chained to 6 other men, one of whom died before we even reached the airport. His name was Mateo. You won't find him in your talking points." Van Hollen was taken aback for a brief moment. Garcia's words hung in the air, heavier than any scripted line. "That's exactly why I came," Garcia continued, his voice unwavering. "Stories like Mateo's, like mine, need to be told. Americans need to understand that justice doesn't stop at our border. Compassion doesn't need a visa." Van Hollen leaned in, trying to maintain control, trying to direct the conversation. "You flew 3,000 miles for this story?" he said, his tone attempting empathy. "To show the world compassion." Garcia tilted his head slightly, a cynical smile curling at the edges of his mouth. "To show compassion, Senator? Or is this just optics? Tell me, is it more believable when it comes with a beachfront view, a cocktail in hand?" Van Hollen stood silent for a moment, unsure how to respond. The photographer snapped another shot. Perfect timing. In that moment, across the world, Naib Boole watched it all unfold, the narrative being twisted in real time. He stood slowly, as Van Hollen approached, offering his hand with deliberate calm. "I've seen cameras before, Senator, but usually they're security ones and I'm not given a script." Van Hollen nodded, his voice measured. "You're not here to perform. You're here to speak your truth. That's all I'm asking." The words hung between them for a moment. Then Kilmar chuckled softly, the sound dry and hollow, completely devoid of humor. "Speak my truth, Senator. The last time I spoke mine, I ended up in a detention van, chained to 6 other men. One of them died before we even reached the airport. His name was Mateo. You won't find him in your talking points." Van Hollen tried to steady the conversation, his words smooth, but betraying a hint of unease. "That's exactly why I came. Stories like Mateo's, like yours, they need to be told. Americans need to understand that justice doesn't stop at our border and that compassion doesn't require a visa." Kilmar leaned back slightly, his expression cold and cynical. A smile curled at the edges of his lips as he surveyed the scene, the backdrop of tropical palms and the camera crew. "You flew 3,000 miles and brought a film crew so you could show compassion with a backdrop of palm trees and cocktails. Tell me, Senator, was empathy more believable when it came with a beachfront view?" Van Hollen's expression faltered, but he pressed on, his tone defensive. "I didn't choose the location, but I won't apologize for trying to humanize what others have tried to dehumanize." Kilmar's smile sharpened, his voice tinged with bitterness. "You think this makes me look human, or does it make you look noble? Either way, I'm just a frame in your campaign reel." As the final words left Kilmar's mouth, the photographer snapped another shot, perfect timing. The scene was set, and the narrative, however carefully crafted, was already slipping through their fingers.